Good morning, Kayla. Morning, Ross.
Morning.
Okay, let's see if we can make it through this presentation today. Last week when we left off, we didn't quite finish up our contemporary art chapter. Contemporary art is art made post 1945. So we'll go ahead and finish this one off. Feminism is on your final exam, so you might want to put an asterisk next to it. Particularly, you're going to want to know some of the names of the different feminist artists like Judy Chicago and Nancy Spiro. But we're talking about the second wave of feminism here. The first wave of feminism is all about getting women the right to vote. The second wave of feminism is about getting equal opportunities in jobs and workforce, as well as equal pay. So that's what this particular wave of feminism is mostly about, and that's what a lot of the art has to do with as well, is trying to get equal pay, equal rights, equal job opportunities in the workforce for females. Obviously, most of the artists that are working in the feminist genre are women at this particular time. And the first one that we are going to look at is Judy Chicago and her dinner party. This is a collaborative effort between many, many different women working together to create a very large installation piece, which the entire piece is about trying to get women recognized in history, particularly US history. So if you're familiar with US history textbooks, they don't quite include near as many women as men. And Chicago was going against the argument that most historians have that women just weren't prevalent in society at that moment, and that's why they aren't included in history textbooks. And to debate that argument, she made the dinner party, which showcases hundreds of women that have been excluded from history textbooks and could easily have been added. And here is that dinner party. So the dinner party itself is, like I said, a very large installation piece in the shape of a triangle. And it goes in according to a linear timeline, beginning over here in US history with Sacagawea. And if you notice, this plate is very flat and two-dimensional, like a regular plate. Underneath that plate is a cowhide. You might notice that the next place setting is very different. Each place setting is made specifically to represent the woman that it was made for. So for Sacagawea, the cowhide being a more natural object. And then if you go around the table, you'll notice at the very end, the plates become three-dimensional sculptures. They rise out as you continue on. Most people argue that these plates look very vaginal in the way that they were made, which possibly yes. But here at the end, we have Georgia O'Keeffe representing a female artist that very briefly predates Judy Chicago herself with the most three-dimensional sculpture. This particular table settings, tablecloth, references some of Judy Chicago's flower paintings. So like I said, every single place setting is different. Every single tablecloth is embroidered with that particular woman's name. Embroidery is considered to be a woman's hobby or a woman's craft, so is quilt making and any real textile artwork. So here for that particular section, Judy Chicago has collaborated with different women homemakers in trying to elevate their craft of embroidery and textile work into a higher art form and showcasing it here as such. Now, not only are there many, many women being represented in the place settings, but there are other women in history down on these tiles. So every single one of these tiles in calligraphy is written the name of yet another woman, like Betsy Ross or Frida Kahlo, that could have been included in textbooks had people really chosen to do so. So really showcasing all of the prominent women in history that have been excluded throughout time. And if you remember on our previous slide, feminism is all about trying to, in particular the art world, make people realize how excluded female artists are. At this point in time, if you are a female artist and you are trying to seek inclusion in a gallery show, it is extremely difficult. It was mostly comprised of, and it technically still is today, men. If you are going to work in an auction house or a museum, they will hire a man before they hire a woman. Because there's this theory that people are more willing and trusting to buy from a man than a female. Would I believe in that? Not quite. But it's a very exclusive world, the art world. It doesn't like to let in minorities or women. And that's what these particular artists are commenting on here. Nancy Spiro, on the other hand, rather than working on the idea of disclusion, is working on how women are being represented in the world. So for years in the art world, females were represented with that reclining nude figure, or the idealized female figure, which we saw originating from ancient Greece and Rome with the depictions of Aphrodite and Venus, who was supposed to be the ideal embodiment of a female. But Nancy Spiro argues that that particular representation of a woman is long outdated, that women today are not just your pretty figures to look at, but they actually have power. And that's what she tries to do in her Rebirth of Venus, which is a print. So to create this particular print, she chose a image of the traditional Venus bust from a Greek sculpture, and she has erupted it into two pieces, and out of that eruption is running a female Olympic athlete. So once again, juxtaposing the ancient depiction of women and how it is outdated in comparison to the modern day female. And we're actually going to skip over performance art because it's not on your test at all, and I kind of just want to focus on that today, and I don't want us to run out of time for your review. So we're going to move on to chapter 25. Chapter 25 is a lovely culmination of different examples of mediums of art and what's happening in those mediums today, as well as prevalent topics in art. So we're going to be going through the different art mediums, beginning with architecture, painting, and photography, and talking about different examples of artists working in that medium today and what they're doing with it. But today's artwork is quite a bit different from some of the artwork that we talked about in the past. It is not controlled by a church. It is not controlled by a school of arts. In fact, today's art world has no rules at all pertaining to the art field. You can do whatever you want. There are no boundaries anymore. That being said, because there are no more rules, this has led to a very large increase in artists using their works to express themselves, which is what most art falls under as far as a category today, is expression. Artists today also often like to combine past trends with present. If you are going to be an artist, you would go to art school today, and a basic requirement for you to take as far as a course would be your art history survey 1 and survey 2. So these artists are being exposed to all of the different trends of art throughout time and history. And oftentimes they will gain inspiration from those trends in their artwork today. And in particular, that merging of the past and present is definitely seen in what we call postmodern architecture, which is the architecture that's being created today. There has been a departure from your basic glass box look. It still pops up in different variations today. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. But buildings are no longer just your identical skyscraper anymore. We have included other variations of that plain glass box, which you can definitely see in Michael Graves' public service building. It is still a box-like structure, but we have steered clear from just using solid glass panel walls and steel beams, and we've gone back to a more Chicago style-esque form of architecture with this particular public services building. Michael Graves has also included quite a few elements from art history in a very playful way. We see that public services building here. So as I said, it's just a box still, but it's not your solid glass box skyscraper. It is more on the Chicago style-esque pattern, which uses more bricks than concrete. But here, Graves has added in some art historical elements, like I mentioned, specifically with the ode to columns. In a very, very playful, abstract way, Graves has included 2 Greek columns on the front of his public services building. So we have a very playful incorporation of past and present here exhibited. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, architecture is very, very different. There's no set rule or style, which leads to the creation of many, many varieties of buildings today, which we can see in Tom Mame's Morphosis, which is quite a bit different from Graves' public services building that we just looked at. This particular building was designed for the University of Cincinnati for their rec center, and it has its purpose in mind with its creation. This particular rec center is located in the very heart of the campus, and it works as a village. Every single pathway on that college campus leads to the rec center. So it's literally the main meeting point of all of those different routes along the campus. And the rec center itself creates a faster walkway to get from one building to the other, as you can easily cut through it. The rec center houses classrooms, a gym, food courts, as well as their student housing. So it's quite a large, expansive building. And if you notice all of the things it includes, has everything that you might ever possibly need. And here's just a snippet of Mane's Morphosis. You can see there are still some odes to your international style with the use of glass and geometric shapes, but he has definitely veered away from that, creating a very round, curved figure for part of the walkways. Your student housing is up on this section over here. And you can see how it might be a central focal point or hub for that particular university with the way it's been designed in a very modern format. And another example, which it's not on here, of architecture being created today, the new Apple building for Singapore, which they already have another one. It's supposed to be a complete circle. So a building that is made out of a perfect sphere, and it is located in the middle of a lake. So quite a bit different as far as verging away from your box-like structure. Now we're doing quite different things with our architecture, and I'm really interested to see how exactly they're going to pull off that spherical building in the middle of a lake and call it a store. There's some schematics of it if you're interested in looking it up, but it's not done yet. It's just an idea at this moment. And that takes us to what's happening in painting. So the current trends in painting today are neo-expressionism. Once again, like I said, most art today falls under the style of expressionist artwork. And if you remember, expressionism is just using your art as a means of expressing your emotions. Today, we call that neo-expressionism or new expression. And our quintessential artist that we're going to look at is Anselm Kiefer. Anselm Kiefer is quite popular at the Fort Worth Modern Museum. They have quite a few of his artworks, and he's very collected today. We're going to look at his artwork, Osiris and Isis, which has to do with Egyptian mythology. Both Osiris and Isis are Egyptian gods and a goddess. Isis is a goddess. And it has to do a lot with symbolism in reference to their story. Is anyone familiar with the story of Osiris and Isis? I wasn't until I started studying Anselm Kiefer either. That's fine. So Osiris and Isis were brother and sister according to Egyptian mythology, but they were also husband and wife. So the story goes as one of the other gods Osiris got into an argument with, and the other god ripped Osiris to pieces and killed him. And of course, Isis, his wife, mourned his death and tried several different methods to try and put him back together and bring him back to life. Eventually, she was successful in putting his pieces back together and bringing him back from the dead. And that's that story in a nutshell. Anselm Kiefer has chosen to focus on the sad portion of that story in which Osiris has been ripped into pieces, with his Osiris and Isis here, but in a very symbolic way. Particularly the way you can understand this is by looking at the media used. This is a very mixed media piece. It uses oil paints, acrylic paints, emulsion, clay, porcelain, lead, copper wire, and circuit board, all on the support of canvas. The fun thing about Kiefer's pieces is they do shed. There's usually a little bit of a tarp area underneath his pieces because the clay flakes off because it's not been fired. Therefore, it's basically dirt and it'll flake off into bits and pieces. So if you ever go to the Fort Worth Modern, you'll notice that with his works. There's also a portion barricaded off because his works are all made with lead, and lead is poisonous. So yeah. But here we have the Osiris and Isis. You'll notice that it is in a step pyramid. Step pyramids came about before the flat-sided pyramids. That was popular. What was popular with people or pharaohs to be buried in was a step pyramid before the flat side. And in the background is a storm raging. So how would this be symbolic of Osiris being ripped into pieces? Well, that has to do with the clay and porcelain. So clay, of course, being representative of the human body. If you're familiar with the biblical story of God making Adam, he was made from dirt. Clay is essentially dirt. So that clay represents Osiris's body. And of course, porcelain is made of clay. And these porcelain pieces are broken. You can see them sticking out. Representative of Osiris's broken bits when he's broken into pieces. That's exactly what the porcelain is representing. And the copper wire and circuit boards, which are throughout the painting, represent our internal circulatory and nervous system in our body. Of course, his is strewn about all over the painting because he's been broken up into many different pieces that need to be collected yet for him to be put back together. The background, like I mentioned, is a storm representative of Isis's anger and sadness and frustration upon her lover's death. So a very interesting form of self-expression that Anselm Kiefer has taken here. but it references the ideas of a loved one passing and the frustrations that come along with that. A lot of Kiefer's works have to do with very dark and depressing themes, although his contemporary piece is not quite so much. Right now he's making artworks with diamonds. In reference to Van Gogh's Starry Night, he paints an entire canvas in shades of dark blues and blacks and grays and then puts diamonds in them, real diamonds. So very different. His current works are not very popular with the critics in comparison to this because there's not quite as much depth going on there with expression, but okay. That takes us to our last example of contemporary painting, and this particular example fuses street art and painting. Fujita himself used to be a graffiti artist, but he made his way into the gallery setting. And he references his graffiti art days in a lot of his artworks, including the one we're about to look at, Street Fight, which is a triptych. And for this particular artwork, Fujita has merged Asia's past and present with a lot of different references in the style. Particularly one way in which he's merged the past and present is by using woodblock print figures and merging that with contemporary graffiti art. Woodblock prints, of course, being very Japanese and traditional as far an art style, and graffiti very contemporary. Here is that triptych. So you can see the three panels quite easily on this one. Of course, you have your Japanese print figures in very traditional Japanese caricature. And in the background, you see the modern cityscape. In the foreground, the very modern and contemporary graffiti art. You can also see it peeking through in the back. He's also merged past and present with his particular medium usage. Gold leaf was primarily used in the Renaissance period for religious paintings and only for religious paintings. It was used to showcase how regal and important figures like Christ and Mary were during that period. Gold leaf would have never been used for a basic everyday scene. So Fujita has used gold leaf, a very traditional medium, with graffiti spray paint cans, which is a very contemporary medium. So he's merged once again past and present in that format as well. The idea of doing a triptych, triptychs also pop up during the Renaissance period as a prevalent art style. That takes us to what's happening in photography today. Our example of photography is from Vic Muñoz and Walid Rad. Vic Muñoz is on your exam, so you're going to want to take good notes on him. And the interesting thing with photography today is that artists are not just taking straight on photos. They're coming up with very interesting compositional choices, such as the Robin Rohde photograph that we looked at the very beginning, He Got Game. Vic Muñoz does something very similar to Robin Rohde, as he takes photographs from above, looking down. Rather than taking pictures of himself, though, Vic Muñoz takes pictures of garbage. So for his compositions, Muñoz arranges very large piles of trash and does sketches around them, and then comes up with very clever titles such as Atlas to showcase that particular composition. Atlas is referring to the Greek or Roman mythological figure. Does anyone know what Atlas does? He carries something very big on his shoulders.
He carries the world on his shoulders.
Very good. Thank you, Grant. Yes, Atlas is known. He did something to upset Zeus, and he was punished by having to carry the world on his shoulders for all of eternity. So Atlas carries the world on his shoulders, and Carlyle also is carrying the world on his shoulders, but in a very different manner. He is carrying the world being symbolized by a lot of garbage on his shoulders. So like I said, he arranges a pile of garbage, does a sketch around it, and then gets up on a crane and takes the image facing down, looking down at it. This is part of his Pictures of Garbage series, so he made several of these. But this really makes the average garbage man look a lot more noble. Atlas himself, a god, so a noble figure. It also references the fact that you could read it or interpret it as the world being garbage. You could also read it or interpret it as the fact that if we didn't have these garbage men, the world would go to garbage. That they're extremely important figures in our society. Can also be read as a bit of a race interpretation, as Carlyle is obviously a minority figure rather than a white person. Particularly Vic Muniz does a majority of his artwork about Hispanics or African Americans. His artwork was showcased in one TV show that was really popular a few years ago. I can remember. I don't remember the name of it. Sorry. But a lot of his artwork has to do about the plays of minority groups and how they are represented today. Our other artist for photography is Walid Rod. Walid Rod, for the particular artwork that we're about to look at, saved a bunch of his negatives from the Lebanese Civil War. Walid Rod himself was Lebanese and he experienced the Civil War. He was there. He took pictures of it happening in person, very rare photographs to capture the bombings and terrorist attacks that ensued. The city was destroyed afterwards. Walid Rod ended up escaping, and years later he found these negatives. Because they were so old, this particular event happened in the 80s and they weren't found until the 2000s. Because they're so old and they had to go through travel and a war, they are very discolored, which gives them a very haunting appearance, once again referencing the amount of people that died because of this Civil War. And here is one of those images. There's 15 in total. Here you might notice that the artists are attributed to Walid Rod and the Atlas Group. Walid Rod himself took the images, but it was the Atlas Group that encouraged him to exhibit them when they came across them. So that would be why there's two artists attributed. And of course, you can see the image of the bomb going off in the distance with one of the buildings. That takes us to what's happening in sculpture today. Sculpture today is very interested in the power of shapes and how recognizable different shapes are, which you definitely can see in Anish Kapoor's To Reflect an Intimate Part of the Red, which showcases very small tidbits of important religious structures. Because we only see small parts, you would think you wouldn't be able to recognize those particular images. However, Kapoor is pulling on the idea that shapes leave an impression in our memories, and we can recognize those different shapes even if we only see a small portion. He has covered the sculptures in powdered pigment. And the entire series is supposed to be very ritualistic because you were drawing upon your memory to remember religious figures and structures. Here. Some of these you might be able to easily recognize, some of them you may not. Are there any images that you can pick out that look familiar? These are not Western religions. This one references Islam. So we have an onion dome, or Jainism technically. Onion domes very prevalent in Middle Eastern architecture and religion. The Taj Mahal uses it. Of course, the Taj Mahal is not a religious building, but so do many, many mosques. They use onion domes. This one also fairly easy to pick out. This is the top part of a Buddha's head with the lovely little circular structures, and these others also reference non-Western religions, so they're a bit harder to pick out. Another artist very interested in the power of shapes is Kiki Smith. Here we see Iceman, which if we were born and could remember 1995, I was 3, so I don't know anything about this. But in 1994, 1995 era, there was a perfectly preserved prehistorical caveman found in ice that had been excavated, and it was all over the news, the media, newspapers. And Kiki Smith was pulling on the idea that because it was such a hot topic that year, people would easily be able to recognize the Iceman if she made a replica sculpture of him, which is exactly what she did here. So this is just a sculpture referencing that particular Neanderthal that was perfectly preserved in ice and all over the news that year. That takes us to public art. We're getting into now different art trends that are popular today. One of them is public art being popular today, partially because there is a rule that says if you are going to build a building using tax dollars, you are required by law to set aside 0.5% of the overall building's cost for an artwork to be made and displayed for the public's enjoyment. That is literally a US law. So a great example of that would be UTPB. A lot of their buildings are paid for with federal tax dollars, which is why they have so many large sculptures, such as Stonehenge nearby. That's that 0.5% being exhibited right there. Midland College, if you've ever walked down the hallways, we have a lot of art displayed. Some of it's donated. Some of it's also an example of the 0.5%. Same with our sculptures on campus. But the Maya Lin Vietnam Veterans Memorial is not so much an example of that 0.5% public art, but it's an example of a memorial remembering Vietnam veterans. Most war memorials are very heroic in their depictions of the soldiers that fought the war. Maya Lin's, however, is a bit of a retrospective or remembrance in a very somber tone in comparison to a heroic portrayal. She represents the initial act of violence with the war by literally cutting or gashing into the land around it. So the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial is below ground because they had to cut away pieces of the land. It is directly opposite of the Washington Memorial, a really tall white building. So it's right across from that, across from the pond. It's very peaceful, reflective. She used, I guess I didn't have a picture, oops. She used very highly polished black granite to reflect you back to yourself as you're reading the names of those who died and disappeared in the Vietnam War. Of course, they are in chronological order by date of missing appearance or death. So very somber. Maya Lin herself hasn't really done much since then. She did this when she was in her early 20s when she was in college. There was a call for submissions for this particular memorial, and a group or panel of veterans went through all of the entries and they chose hers. Another example of public art, this one is made because of that 0.5%. This is Instrument Implement Walla Walla Campanile. This one is on your final exam, and I forgot to include it in your review, so you're going to definitely want to like underline, highlight, put an asterisk next to it because I forgot to put it in your review. And I'm sorry, but I'm mentioning it now. Walla Walla Campanile is made for Walla Walla Community College in Walla Walla, Washington, because that's fun to say. Um, it is a large sculptural piece, which includes a computer as well as a musical instrument. If you've ever looked at one of those music boxes with the little tines on it, and if you like tick on it, it'll make a sound. Yeah, that's basically what it does. But this has a specific function that aids the community. So Walla Walla, Washington's main source of income is salmon, particularly harvesting them. So they rely a lot on high levels of reproduction of salmon eggs, but salmon only like to reproduce when the temperature of the water and the pH values of the water are just right. But what Walla Walla Campanile does is it measures the water temperature and the pH values, and it tells you what those values are every hour via musical tones. So if your campanile for that hour is off key or off tone or missing notes, that tells you something is wrong with the temperature or the pH. The entire structure is solar powered. You can see the solar panel over here. You can also see the musical instrument and the speaker over here. There are wires that lead to a nearby stream to help monitor those values. So this particular example of public works art has a function and is also a bit fun for the public to enjoy as well. Speaking of fun for the public to enjoy, if you guys have noticed, we have a very large tower in the very center of our campus. It plays music every hour too. Depending on what people have selected to play, it changes all the time. And supposedly, if you know who to talk to, you can select what it plays. I don't know who to talk to, but I have been told there's a specific person that will take requests. If you're interested, you might want to figure out who. I don't care because I can't hear it. And that takes us to another popular form of art today, which is issue-oriented art. A good chunk of art today is made with the idea of issues or prevalent topics, such as the Black Lives Matter movement or the past presidential election that we just experienced. There were so many artworks made pertaining to both of those hot topics. Barbara Kruger and Fred Wilson are two examples of artists that make artwork that are tied to specific issues. Kruger in specific is interested with media advertisements and consumerism, which we see exhibited in her untitled "I Shop, Therefore I Am," which was a slogan that she invented. And I'll just go ahead and show you the image here. She stole an ad from a Tylenol commercial and she took the box out and she replaced it with "I shop, therefore I am," making a statement on consumerism saying that if you buy this, you're going to become this, and popular trends that you have to have that particular shoe or that particular hoodie, or else you're not going to be something. Of course, Instagram today is very prevalent in leading those current trends on what we should and shouldn't buy and what we will be or won't be if we do or don't buy it. Funny enough, and ironically, Kruger later on silkscreen printed this onto a shopping bag and sold it. Huh? Yeah, Supreme copied the font, yeah. Yes, they did. Supreme came after Kruger, so yes. Good note. I don't usually remember to mention those things because I don't think anyone cares about those things. Our other example of issue-oriented art is quite a bit different. Fred Wilson, more interested in racial stereotypes that are showcased in the United States in particular. Fred Wilson does a series called Mining the Museum, in which he goes into museums and he shuffles through their archives and he uses the art pieces that they already have to showcase different topics, usually related to race. In particular, this one right here, he created in a large installation. Once again, an installation takes up an entire space. using cigar store Indian sculptures that he found in the basement. They used to be exhibited outside tourist hotspots. Some of you might be old enough to remember that, but they're very stereotypical interpretations of what a Native American looks like. And he has all of these stereotypes facing photographs of actual Native Americans, which is quite the juxtaposition. It's how the US perceives Native Americans versus what they actually are. So definitely a statement on race here with Fred Wilson. That is on your test. I forgot. It's on your test. So I'll give you a few seconds to jot something down if you need to. I'd love to understand how all of the technical difficulties are always solved for your class. Like there's never any issues with you guys, and there's no problems. For those that arrived late, my first hour class didn't have any internet. Yeah, it was just me talking to myself with no pictures. They have many issues. There's like an issue almost once a week with my first hour. It's so weird. I don't understand, but oh well. That takes us to another popular trend with art, which is street art. We've kind of already touched on that with Fujitos, but street art is just using graffiti. It's a very rapid style of creating artwork because it's illegal. You don't want to get caught. So oftentimes they will use things like stencils and spray paint to make the process a lot faster. The first real artist to use street art was Lee Quinones. He would paint a subway car with his name, Lee, really large, and his artworks ended up making it into galleries and museums, which is just why his is considered art, just because it made it into a gallery. But it's really no different from regular graffiti style. It's just his name. Very rapid, once again, because it is illegal. This particular streetcar was repainted after a certain period of time. They did allow it to be exhibited for a while, though, just because Lee Quinones is quite popular. Of course, our other prevalent street artist is Banksy. Banksy, another one that tries not to get caught. Nobody knows who Banksy is. We've already looked at Banksy a few times. Once again, Banksy uses a stencil and spray paint to try and paint as quickly as possible. And he usually does a lot of commentary on society and how society is today. This particular example comments on the fact that we used to be able to hunt for our food and now we just go through drive-thrus. That takes me to Retina and Risk and Oceans at Risk. This particular artwork was not done illegally. It was done at the request of a actual patron. This wealthy man purchased in Santa Monica a dilapidated building, and he was restoring it to sell later on. And instead of having the building covered by scaffolding and tarps, he decided to pay for the artist group Retina and Risk to paint a very large mural on the side, because that makes sense. You buy a building and instead of having tarps, you want a painting. You got to be really wealthy to do stuff like that. But for this, Retina and Risk decided to make this lovely example of environmentally interested and invested artwork. So if you notice in the front on the fence, there is a QR code. Passerbys were encouraged to scan the QR code, which would then take them to a website, Heal the Bay, which promoted different ways in which you could help decrease the amount of trash and pollution that was ending up in the Santa Monica Bay at the moment, because it was messing up with habitats of the natural marine life there. So they also had, of course, a place in which you could donate funds to Heal the Bay as well. This particular artwork references in the background the color story of a sunset along the bay with the ocean in the foreground. And this wording is gibberish. It doesn't mean anything at all. Kind of referencing the idea of a QR code and the coding that goes into that. Unfortunately, the neighbors did not appreciate this large art piece, and it was removed very shortly thereafter. They considered that it went against city ordinances and city codes, and they didn't get permission to do it. So it was removed very quickly. Such rude neighbors. I'd much rather look at this than tarps personally. But yeah, whatever. And it had a good cause. But that's another example of street art, obviously not an illegal one. Well, technically it was removed very shortly thereafter, but I don't consider this one illegal, although I don't really consider street art illegal. And that takes us to global present with artists that are from around the world. We do see, and you might have noticed with the interesting names such as Anselm Kiefer and Anish Kapoor, and El Anatsui and Doris Salcedo, that we are seeing a lot of non-Western artists these days. That is thanks to the internet. Because we have the internet, we're more globally connected and linked, and a lot more artists that would have otherwise been probably looked over are being recognized for their artworks today because they're gaining entry into these museums and galleries via popularity through internet, such as El Anatsui. El Anatsui, we're going to look at his Sasa. El Anatsui is a South African artist, and to create Sasa, he used cast-off liquor bottle tops and wove them into a tapestry. If you remember when we were talking about African art, they're very well known for their tapestry weaving, so he's referencing that particular cultural tradition. He's also referencing triangular trade with the use of liquor bottle tops. One of the things that was prevalently traded during the triangular trade, besides people, was rum. So that was one of the main products that was being shipped around during that era, and he is referencing his culture with the medium and the method used to create Sasa. But he has used that sad heritage in order to create something very beautiful. It's interesting to think that this is entirely made of aluminum bottle caps and copper wire. Takes us to Doris Salcedo. Doris Salcedo likes to make a lot of artworks referencing and trying to bring awareness to the drug violence and gang violence that's happening in Central and South America. She is on your test. So yeah. And we're going to look at Plegaria Muda, or silent prayer, which is another large installation. It's made of different paired tables, actually 166 units of paired tables, and in between the tables is mounds of dirt with grass seed. This references the prayers as well as the deaths of the victims that have to live in these violent areas in Central and South America. A lot of her artwork has to do with the disappearances of people in those areas, as well as occasionally they will find large burial sites in which bodies have just been dumped, and she'll make artworks about those. Most of her artwork is very grotesque and depressing. The particular one we're going to look at is not as disgusting looking. Like some of them, like she did one artwork that was a tongue. It was a tongue, like a person's tongue. Like not a painting, not a photograph. It was a tongue. Because there was a man who, as punishment for going against one of the gangs, had his tongue cut off. And he kept it. And he donated it to Doris Salcedo. And she exhibited it as a means of trying to bring awareness to that particular issue. So most of her artwork is quite a bit grotesque. Doris Salcedo herself has been put in jail several times because of her art, because the governments do not like her art. because she is bringing awareness to those particular heated subjects, then they don't like it. But here we see silent prayer, which is made up of, like I said, 166 units of wooden tables. They're all approximately 6 feet long, referencing a coffin or a dead body. And then on top of it, you see a mound of dirt in which grass seed has been planted. And of course, there is another table on top. Those grass seeds and the grass coming out in between represent hope, faith, and prayers, the hope and faith and prayers of the people that are still there. So you have a reference to the people that have left and a reference to the people that have been left behind. They are still hopeful that something will come of this, that something will be better, that there is a positive light at the end of the tunnel. And now, time for what you all came for, your final exam review. So, for your final exam, you have 2 hours to take it. With this test, you cannot log on, log off, and log back on to finish it later. You have 2 hours. I would set aside 2 hours of time because you can't start it and stop it and start it again. You got to take it all in one sitting. It is comprised of multiple choice, short essay, and long essay questions. For the multiple choice, there are 13 questions in total. Each question is 1 point each. For the short essay, there are 2 questions. Each question is 5 points. And your long essay, there is only 1, and it is worth 15 points. I am now going to go over the different topics that you're going to want to know or highlight in your notes or your book before you get on to that test and start taking it. Beginning with your multiple choice topics, you're going to want to know Anselm Kiefer. We just talked about him, particularly what category he fell under. Does anyone remember what category his paintings were under? Neo-expressionism. Very good, Bailey. Thank you. See, the more we can do this, the more you'll have all of the answers. But if we don't get any comments, then we don't get any answers. Next is the artist Pablo Picasso. In particular, you're going to want to know what influenced his Cubism. So one of the influences was Cezanne. You're going to want to know, in particular, the other one. Remember, this was around the time period in which museums were starting to exhibit things from other cultural groups. And Picasso was influenced by a particular culture and inspired to create his Cubism. Next, of course, is Fred Wilson. Like I said earlier, he is on your test. You're going to want to know the main topic of his mining the museum artwork. In particular, what was the issue he was interested in? Yeah, racial stereotypes. Very good, Jaden. The next artist is Jacob Lawrence. You're going to want to know what particular movement he was a byproduct of. It was a type of Renaissance, but not the Italian one. Jaden's trying.
The Harlem Renaissance.
Very good, Audrey. The Harlem Renaissance. You guys are the best class to go through this so far. We're good now. Thank you. My other classes just sat there in silence, and I was like, well, okay. It's your test. That takes us to the rest of your multiple choice topics. You're going to want to know what Vic Muñoz did with his photography, specifically how he made it. Yeah, very good, Jaden. Yeah, so he got up high on cranes and he took pictures looking down at garbage piles. And next is Marcel Duchamp. For him, you're going to very specifically want to know the particular kind of photography used to create Nude Descending the Staircase #2. Has a name. The type of photography used to make Nude Descending the Staircase #2. Stroboscopic, yes, stroboscopic photography. That particular camera takes multiple images of the same shot. It's just a continuous image shot of the woman walking down the stairs. And that takes us to Doris Salcedo. You are going to want to know specifically what topic she was invested in. So trying to bring awareness to the gang violence and drug violence that's happening in Central and South America. And your next artist is Richard Hamilton. You're going to want to know what art movement he was part of. Here's a hint. He had a Tootsie Roll Pop in his collage. He's part of pop art. Very good. Richard Hamilton is a pop artist. You're going to want to know that. Next is Piet Mondrian. You're going to want to know what art style he invented. Remember that particular art style uses primary colors and black horizontal and vertical lines. It translates to the style. De Stijl, yes. Although I think on the test I just said the style. Because who remembers De Stijl other than me? That takes us from our artist category on to different art movements, beginning with constructivism. For constructivism, you're going to want to know what country it originated from. Same country as suprematism. Starts with an R. Russia. Yeah. Constructivism is from Russia. For fauvism, you're going to want to know some of the main characteristics, particularly how they used color. Yes, so they used very bright, interesting color choices to express themselves. Very good. See, you guys could have taken the test now. You'd have been fine. And then the last one is surrealism. You're going to want to know some of the names of the artists that were part of surrealism, like Dali, Magritte, Juan Miro, and Max Ernst. Oh, feminism. Oh yeah, I forgot that one. You're going to want to know the names of those artists too. So Chicago and Spiro. And that is it for your multiple choice. It takes me next to your short essay. Now for your short essay, what inevitably happens every semester is somebody just goes to Google and gets the answer. And then I'm like, well, you plagiarized, number one. Number two, you didn't actually answer the question. So your two topics for short essays are German expressionism and regionalism. Each short essay needs to be approximately 3 to 5 sentences. For your German expressionism short essay, You're going to be asked to discuss the characteristics and some of the artworks made by the two German expressionist groups. So the Blue Rider group and the Bridge group. What inevitably happens is someone goes to Google and they get the list of every single person that was in the group and they just write me a list of names. Don't do that. In fact, it'd be best if you just didn't use Google at all for these because it'll probably help you. Just use your notes in your book. So like I said, for the German Expressionism question, just list the names of the two groups and some of their characteristics and some examples of their artworks, and you'd be good. That's all you gotta do. Similarly, for American regionalism, just pick a couple of artists, discuss the characteristics of American regionalism, and discuss the artwork. So you could pick like Grant Wood and Thomas Hart Benton, list an artwork for each and discuss it. That'd be good. You'd be done. Now, for the big one. Your long essay. I'm giving you the entire question. You can pre-write your long essay. In fact, I would recommend you pre-write your long essay. There is no minimum or maximum length for this essay. If you use outside sources, which you can for this one, it'd be fine. Make sure to cite them so that when it goes through the plagiarism checker, it doesn't ding you. But the long essay question premises states, during World War II, the epicenter of the art world shifted from Paris to New York. Along with this shift was a major change in the art styles and trends produced in the United States as European artists immigrated to the US, bringing with them new ideas and techniques. In detail, please explain the ways that European immigrants affected American artists and art styles during and immediately after World War II. Please use examples when expressing thoughts on this subject. Also, suggest some of the reasons for these changes. So you could, this is just an example, you don't have to do this. You could discuss what was prevalent as far as an art trend prior to the immigration. So American regionalism would be a good topic to start. And then discuss how those European artists influenced art afterwards and then what comes afterwards. So like I mentioned before, a good chunk of those immigrants end up getting jobs as teachers as well as in museums and galleries, educating the next generation of artists in America. This in turn leads to the creation of things like abstract expressionism and color field painting. So great artists to talk about for your examples would be people like Jackson Pollock or Mark Rothko, since they came immediately after World War II. Like I said, there's no minimum or maximum as far as this essay. It's just your thoughts on the subject. You can use outside source material for this one, just make sure to cite it.
Do you want APA format?
It's whatever format you're more comfortable with. I'm not too particular.
Okay.
I've never really cared about that. I'm like, as long as your sources are cited, I'm good. Like I said, you can pre-write it and I'd recommend that. Yeah, Jaden? You might want to include a brief one just because it makes more sense. Jaden was asking if you need an intro or a conclusion. And I said you might want to include a very brief one, like a one-sentence one or something, just so things make sense. But I probably won't care too much. I'll care more about you writing your answer. But yeah. So like I said, you have 2 hours to take this test. I would definitely recommend you pre-write that long essay so that you don't have to worry about time too much. What happens to the people that don't pre-write it is they usually end up worrying about time, and they speed through the beginning part to get to the end. I wouldn't do that. Just go ahead and get that one done, and then you can just copy and paste it into that box and go on with your happy little lives after that. So your test is already open. It opened at midnight and it will close on Thursday at noon. That gives me just enough time to grade them all to get your grades in on time. You can take it during your usual class time. Like I told Bailey earlier, this room's going to be open for the rest of the week. I'm going to be in here during the regular class time. So if you guys want to come in and take it then, you can, but it's not 2 hours. I know you guys have other classes you have to go to. So just contemplate how you want to do that. For those of you online, I am going to be on Teams each day during your regular class time. If you have any issues, you can log on and ask them. But what I would recommend is do not procrastinate on taking this, because what happened this weekend with my online class, they had to take theirs this weekend, and I had 2 girls procrastinate until late last night, and Canvas was down for a couple of hours. Yeah, so don't do that. If something does happen, text me or email me. Texting me usually reaches me a little bit faster, so you might want to do that. If you have issues, and I'll try and work it out with you on how to fix it. If for whatever reason you do get kicked out of your test, email me or text me and I'll reopen that for you, okay? I will be here for you guys. This is like the 1 week that I'm literally attached to my phone just to try and troubleshoot issues with you. But if you do not procrastinate, there's probably less of a chance of an issue popping up that would inhibit you from doing your best on this test. But last but not least, I want to say thank you for you guys taking this class. I know it was a bit of an odd semester with half of you guys online and half in person. It's been weird. But thank you for putting up with the oddness and being very, just really great students and positive throughout all of this. I appreciate it, and it inspires me every day when I see you guys trying this hard for something that's not exactly easy to accomplish at times, to do a lesson like this. You've all been wonderful students, and I hope that you guys take another class with me again. I would really look forward to seeing all of you another time, because I appreciated all of your hard effort this semester. But if not, I know all of you will be very successful students because you are such hardworking people. And of course, like I said, I enjoyed having you this semester, and I wish you all the best of luck in the future and on your final. I will hopefully see you guys again, but if not, it has been a pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you as well. I enjoyed it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for
Audrey.
being a great professor.
Thank you, Audrey.
You have a great week.
You too. I think we're good.
Yeah. I think last semester, for the first 8 weeks, I only had one early college high school student that didn't finish it in like the usual last time. And I just had to open it again for him to finish the next day, just so we can get started. Bye, Bailey. Goodbye, Ross.